Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, hello all, and welcome to this seminar on childhood and nation, organized by the Loughborough University Nationalism Network. My name is Joanna, and I will be chairing today's talk. For today's talk, we are delighted to have with us Professor Zsuzsanna Millei, Professor in Early Childhood Education at the Faculty of Education and Culture at Tampere University in Finland. Professor Millei has written extensively about childhood education as a political form of being, and most recently contributed to the book Society and Social Changes Through the Prism of Childhood, published by Routledge this year, and her contribution was titled Thinking Through Memories of Children in Post-Socialist Spaces, Ordinary Lives in Extraordinary Times. Professor Millei has also published extensively about childhood education across time and spaces, including different national spaces and ideologies, including Cold War ideology. Professor Zsuzsanna Millei is the co-leader of the Early Childhood Education Institutions, Policies and Practices Research Group, and also leads the Microbial Childhood Restoring Daycare Ecologies Project, which is funded by the Nationalism Foundation. So just to remind you, Professor Millei's presentation will take around 30 minutes, and after that there will be time to ask questions and have a discussion. Please note that this seminar will be recorded, so it would be great if you could mute yourself and switch off your camera unless you are talking. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor Millei, and thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Johanna, and I wait for the first slide, yes, so we can go maybe already to the second one. So about 10 years ago, I met Marco in Loughborough, at Loughborough University, and that was the Children's Geographies Conference, and we met, and I asked him the question, you know, what childhood studies or what research on childhood and nationalism can contribute to nationalism studies, and he responded that maybe I can give a better answer than he does. So during the past 10 years or even a little bit more, I was thinking on this question, and today I have maybe some beginning responses to this question, but let's see how we go. So thank you for this invite, and I'm here with lots of my colleagues who actually I was thinking with about nation and childhood. So thank you very much for coming. And you will see some of your ideas presented as well. And I'm also very excited to be amongst colleagues who are researching nationalism more broadly. So when I searched in the premier journal, as you see, I put in child, and 9 results came back. And that was very striking to me, but also I think representative of this void in nationalism research about childhood and the research on childhood and nation. When I put in childhood, then I had 1 hit and children 31 hit, but in those studies, actually children were presented as part of families or as related to adults. So I wouldn't consider that as research on childhood and nation. Stambridge already in 2011 said that nationalism studies is adult-centric. Others also made similar arguments about social theorizing. And in general, they argued that in childhood studies, we share the view that we have lots to contribute to social theorizing. However, somehow we cannot communicate in between the 2 fields. So I will try to do something like that today. I will introduce some ideas through my studies, specifically 2, and then I will pose some questions and maybe some responses to this challenge. Can you please turn the slide? So I would like to first say what childhood is. Johanna, if you could turn the slide, please. Thank you very much. So first I will say what childhood is a little bit. I know that many of you know it very well. And then I will look at one intersection of childhood and nation, and that is how children made and learned to identify with the nation, as well as learn to see the world as divided by nation. So childhood is a period of life that has changing membership. It is also a social strata of society and also a social construction. And it's contingent in history and changes in various cultures, its understanding. And therefore, childhood cannot be taken as a universal phenomenon. And however, often in social theorizing, this is what's happening when childhood is considered. Can we turn the slide now? So the intersections of childhood and nationalism have been studied from various angles. For example, socialization and relatedly identity formation. And these are intersections that come easy to grab, especially as related to Michael Billig's notion of banal nationalism. Studies explored national socialization in schools, in subject and through curricula, so subject studies and curricula, textbooks, or the adoption of national habits and practices. Another stream of studies, such as Katrin Throsell's study that I'm showing here, studies socialization through interviews of children. Katrin thought to learn about childhood as a key period for reproducing the naturalness of nationalism that Michael Billig emphasized. Katrin argues that childhood is especially helpful in understanding how we are able to forget about the nation, since, and I quote her, specific nature of early socialization confers particular characteristics of reality that is internalized there, most particularly a combination of omnipresence, inscrutability, and self-evidence. So in early childhood, birth, family, belonging, home, and nation somehow attach together and form the basis for the universal ideology of nationalism. And it's taken for grantedness, which is initiated in the period of childhood. So nationalism attaches to homeliness and that kind of honest, homely belonging, the creation and feeling of ontological security. Hence, emotion and identity building relate to this kind of home of the nation. In other words, nation and the self are both the sources of one's being in the world, which develops together with feelings for one's family home. Childhood is also an important period in life, since the dialectic of remembering and forgetting the nation, as it underpins our everyday life, starts in childhood. Can you turn the slide now, please? So besides the importance of early socialization, studying childhood offers ways to understand how nationalism is being taught and is learned, highlighting further its mechanisms and dynamics. In an article co-authored with colleagues, who some of them are here, we took up this task and wanted to understand how nature becomes the second nature, and here pun is intended, of children in Nordic societies. Nature is not only frequently referenced in Nordic national narratives, it is done so in close relation to childhood. Can you turn slide? Children have been constructed as closer to nature than adults ever since the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau discussed the relation between nature and children in his book, Émile. In the Nordic countries, especially, having a special relationship with nature is connected to Nordic romantic nationalism, different stages of nation building, and the emergence of Nordic national identities. For instance, Ideland observes that the categories Swedish and knowing about nature and nature lovers stick together and create a foundation stone in the imagined national community, and nature becomes a place where a person, a non-Swede, can learn to acquire Swedishness. Deep connection with nature and valuing the outdoors are considered important aspects of good Nordic childhood as well. Nordic children and parents, of course, are expected to perform a playful openness to nature rather than being afraid or to express disgust. For example, when seeing a dead animal. They also teach children how to dress properly according to the season, in which layers play a vital role. There are also expectations placed on educators about how to properly support children's being in nature, although the early childhood curriculum does not mention nature specifically. Perhaps this lack of mention indicates its very taken for grantedness. In this way, One can confidently argue that nature is a form of banal or everyday nationalism in the Nordic space, silently underpinning the running of children's life. If you turn slide, please. So in our study on Swedish mobile preschools, we explored how children are taught being in nature. We took the teaching or pedagogy of nation as happening through not only human, but also non-human, spatial and emotional ways, drawing on my work on the pedagogy of nation. We saw differences between buses of how nature was taught, especially between those who had Swedish or migrant background. Mobile preschools are buses that go out to urban spaces, rural areas, with children all day and every day. The bus operates as a school building would. Children can eat and be on the bus as well as being out in nature. Can you turn, please? Swedish children were assumed to know how to be in nature and to keep safe. So this is the picture from the ethnography that we are drawing on. As you see, they can spread around in quite distances and they are assumed to be knowing the rules to be there. They were taught about nature while they were outside. So they were able to touch, explore, to see the animals, go close to them and so on. Engagement with nature was encouraged and children were to roam free within the agreed boundaries. Could we go to next slide, please? Migrant children visited infrastructured areas with built-in toilets and walking paths, rather than wider places in nature where they were taught in a stage-like manner how to be safe in nature, walking on the path, holding hands. In one event, the teacher in the purple bus told children that it is spring. So the purple bus was the bus with the migrant children. That it is spring, and she knows that because the flowers are appearing. At that moment, the Swedish researcher stepped in and corrected the teacher that spring is actually coming with the particular flower that is also in the as a national symbol appearing in many places. So this differentiation between when spring is coming for the Swedish researcher and the migrant teacher, pointing to differentiated belonging to the nation that Marco Antoncic is also pointed at in his study on African youth in Italy. However, we have no focus in the data on how children themselves related to nature differently. So here, there are differentiation in how children are taught in nature, touching nature, exploring in nature, and learning or being in nature very differently. From the study, we could highlight how the very idea of good Swedish childhood in nature is produced through differential pedagogies in everyday practice, producing different belonging to the nation. Which nature and nature have been taught depended on whom and with whom is what it was performed and which understanding was learned and embodied. Our study showed, sorry, can you turn a slide because I think that some of it has on the next slide. Yes. Our study showed that diversity brings about change in how the nation is constructed and reproduced in everyday practices, and that children's experiences are not universal. We also showed that performing nature provides one way to de-ethnicize and de-racialize the nation in its production. Can we turn to the next slide? So since childhood is a relational concept, as Nigel Thomas explains, this means that when we learn about childhood, we also learn about adulthood. When we study children, we study people. When we study social relations and social interactions involving children, we do not isolate children from their wider social context, and what we learned has a wider application. It is especially so if we do not essentialize and universalize childhood and think situationally. If we look at childhood in changing and varied social structure, we can see that it has major relevance to nationalism studies. However, when looking at mainstream nationalism studies and theories from a child perspective, one can observe a taken for granted position on children and childhood and the lack of focus on this vital period in life. Scholars on nationalism, in their analysis of modern nationalism, often assume a universal childhood in the practice of nationalism, instead of exploring normative conceptions of childhood and the historicity and situatedness of the ways a national culture are passed on and is understood and reproduced by children, as we showed it above. Childhood can be used as method for theorizing and researching everyday nationalism, as well as discussing variegated appearances of everyday nationalism, as it is pertain or can pertain to children's everyday lives. As Norbert Elias points out, can you turn the slide, please? I think it's on the next one. Yes, as Norbert Elias argues for the importance of childhood in social theorizing, since, as he explains, society is composed of individuals whose historicity or growing up is part of these societies, he explains. The historicity of each individual, the phenomenon of growing up to adulthood, is the key to understanding what society is. The sociality integral to human beings only becomes apparent if one is aware that what relations to other people mean for the small child. So our study also raises the following questions for further theorization. Is it possible to claim that every child might simply be able to naturally recognize and partake in every nationalism as children, wherever they might go in the world? Alternatively, can we identify particularities of childhood that counter the argument for the universal experience or some universal process of how children learn a nation? And related to this, are we moving towards greater or less universality? For example, a hegemony, sameness of effect, sameness of process or practices when we look at nationalism in its practice forms. Can you turn slide, please? Oh yes, this was the slide with all these questions. Thank you. So the next slide, please. So let me return to the understanding that children are born into a world, and early on they internalize characteristics of reality, including the national division of the world, attachments, and so on. The characteristics of reality are produced in cultural understandings and passed on and internalized by children. These cultural understandings also include imaginaries of how the world looks and operates. In the following article, co-authored with Sirpa Lappalainen, who is, I think, also here, we were very interested what kind of imaginaries children internalize in relation to the local nation, the global, or the world, and how those connect with grand narratives, myth, and imaginaries of the Anthropocene and nation during and beyond modernity. We draw on data in this article produced in an Australian preschool with children who are 3 to 5 years old. Can you turn the slide, please? On one drawing, the word was represented with a light blue circle. They were anchors fixing the word in space. Light blue circles in the middle of the word represented Australia. The child explained his drawing the following way. This blue circle is my word. The green part is Australia, where I live. The anchors are holding on to the word because there is rubbish on Australia. The word is supposed to move slowly, but it is moving really fast to get rid of all the rubbish. So the anchors have to hold it in place and only the rubbish will fly off. There is a global imaginary, a position of the nation within the word, and the techno-solutionist imaginary in this child's mind, where the space offers room to make the rubbish disappear instead of occupying his nation, Australia. The child is separated from this word. He is looking down on this word from space. Can you turn the slide? On another drawing, homecoming to Sydney and Australia is represented as an emotional moment, full of joy and enthusiasm. It does not seem to matter from where the traveler arrives. The importance is in coming back home. The world-famous iconic cultural artifact appears in the background, the Sydney Opera House, giving the location Sydney Harbour and symbolizing both the city and Australia. The iconic Sydney Opera House and the harbour where the traveller embarks from in the drawing represents homecoming with a national symbol and a form of banal nationalism, and expresses feelings for the home and the nation. Cartographic and visual imaginaries encode and teach about the world by imposing multiple separations between nations, languages, and local and the global. Children's maps and drawings portray in different colors the earth and its surface, roads connecting different cultures and places on the globe with languages they do not understand, cities, the ocean and parks, economies and transport hubs appear, as well as imaginaries resembling media images. Children also drew Earth with a perspective from space, a small planet. Some children expand the image into portraying geopolitics and war and their fear and safety in their own nation. And some, as the above image, draws the potential of science and the advanced technologies for environmental solutions. Children's imaginaries of the world run parallel with modern political habits, conflicts, and institutions that they learned quite early on. Movement away from the local and towards the global and the space represent modernity's progress. Can we turn slide? As Jedediah Purdy explains in his book titled After Nature, Politics for the Anthropocene, representations of the world are political sites, since politics emerges from how we see and how we learn to see, how we suppose the world works, how we suppose that it matters, and what we feel we have at stake in it. It is implicit, everyday metaphysics, the bold speculations buried in our ordinary lives. Children's representation reproduce modern binaries, separations, inclusions, including human separation from and technological domination over the world and nature, a characteristic worldview during the Anthropocene. Can we turn? To take seriously the Anthropocene, Ulrich Beck proposed that we must transform the basic concepts and institutions of industrial nation-state modernity. Such concepts are environment, society, life, the social, identity, and belonging. He called for engendering notions of the living environment that goes beyond human and the social in a new national vocabulary and imaginaries. Many merged post-human theorizing to understand political life, such as, for example, Sue Donaldson and Via Kimlicka in Zoopolis, who makes rights-based proposal to include the relational obligations in political communities that arise from the varied ways that animals relate to humans. Thinking of plants, Stefano Mancuso, in his book The Nations of Plants, offers a charter based on the general principles that regulate the common life of plants as norms applicable to all living beings, placing plants at the center of juridical reality. It is well known that plants offer symbolic sources for the nation, but what would it be to take plants as living beings more seriously in nationalism studies? For example, Stephanie Fischel argues that trees and forests are both vital components of a healthy earth system and productive examples for expanding international relations disciplinary boundaries. Plants are also figures of anti-national resistance in Aboriginal poetry in Australia. Others, such as Anat Singh and Rudik, remind us that some rivers also have legal personhood. Forests or mountains might also have national representation and could be included in an expanded notion of the political and its communities. Beyond these attempts to reshape politics, there is a whole host of theorizing that aim to go beyond, that aims to conceptualize the commons, cultivating ecologies of solidarity and care beyond capitalism, anthropocentrism, patriarchy, racist and the state, drawing on indigenous and ecofeminist thinking and onto epistemologies. Can we turn now? Researching with education open spaces for societal change, thus we speculated in our article with Sirpa, how to reconceptualize society, the environment, the nation, identity and belonging, and the human, as Beck proposed for a different type of politics and the nation. We were motivated to reorientate early education towards a different kind of environmental imagination about the world with a new politics and ethics attached to it, using Bruno Latour's and ecofeminist ideas such as Haraway, Plumwood, Kimmerer, Marguerite Roy, and others. This new politics would consider nature beyond its symbolic form as it is used in political representation of nations. Second, it would go beyond scientific approaches that removes themselves from nature to get to that people remove themselves, like scientists, from nature to get an objective truth about it. Third, we can go beyond describing nature with a machine model and machine concepts. Latour's book, titled Earthly Politics, urgently calls for making nature, or how he terms it, the thin crust of the earth, to become the attractor of politics for the Anthropocene. The attractor earth, in this understanding, is the humus, water, air that sustain life and stretch between a few kilometers from the soil surface to the outer end of the atmosphere, that shields us from the energies of the cosmos. This is what he calls critical zone. Earthly politics proposes a new take on biopolitics as well, that is a life-giving and life-living practice. Reorienting politics and ethics to nature requires the reconstruction of age-old concepts like the global and the local, nature and society, matter and reality, systems of production, and perhaps most importantly, what it means to be human, as many proposed earthling might be a suitable concept. This politics, instead of seeking to create symbolic roots into the national soil or motherland, takes soil as teeming with life, to use Bella Casa's term, and into which real roots grow, and to and from which new forms of effect can emerge. Humans are not only part of human and symbolic communities, we are also of the world, as Karen Barrett explains. We are from and part of matter, the soil, biological life, multi-species communities, and so on. Our bodies are situated in ecological relations, reliant on and mutually entangled in the life processes of the earth, besides the inherited cultural world. Can we turn now, please? So because we work in education mostly, in our article, we speculated on a different kind of word building that is possible in education. In our word building early in life, the child draws on her own capacities of knowing in being as her body is alive to the world. And this is, biological life, ecology, air, water that I'm talking about, and makes sense of these embodied experiences. What if society offered other than modernist and anthropocentric understandings and imaginaries for matching these sensations in the child word building? What if we consider the child from birth as an earthling? What are the sensations of the knowing in being of this earthling that exceeds current cultural and political imaginaries? Can new imaginations and political community and the nation be recreated from the small spaces of childhood? Can you turn, please? As Vanessa Agard-Jones explains, using Michel Rolfe-Trullo highlighted the importance of small spaces of Afro-Caribbean diaspora. He argued that they matter in the world, together with seemingly marginal people like peasants and small states, and that marginal people are central to social analysis. So he took the small place of the village, and that's where he asked his questions. And that's where he traced national, regional, and global processes at work at the scale of the everyday. And with that, he redefined the village and its past transformation to its present identity. Applying his thinking to nation and childhood, can we take the small places of childhood as the place we do social analysis from? Can we both be mindful of modernist and anthropocentric imaginaries and what else is happening for children as they inhabit and become with the world that goes beyond the human? From observations about what else is going on, we could develop a different sociality that ties together a nation from childhood by acknowledging and cultivating modern human relationalities, nature, trees, plants, animals, mountains, rivers, and so on. In my view, indigenous understandings of the world lend us a good start for this reconceptualization. Can we turn? And then I conclude. Thank you. So childhood opens methodological spaces to understand how the nation gets a hold on children's minds, sense of belonging and feelings, and why this connection is so fundamental and particular in our societies. It is about the textures and qualities of childhood socialization as part of entering the world. Children are not only being socialized into the nation, they also have capacities to reproduce the nation even differently as adults do. Thus, they are agents in society, and without understanding children's relations with the nation, we cannot fully understand how nationalism operates. While I did not have time to discuss, childhood also offers symbolic resources for nationalism, as modern childhood is associated with futurity and innocence. Not only child climate activists, but also politicians and politics capitalize on this futurity and is an important site for social analysis. Real, that I mean flesh and bodied children, are also important to consider in nationalism studies, since they will be the new nation, and how they see the world and relate intersubjectively will provide the texture of the forthcoming society. It is important to acknowledge that childhood is not universal, and the very contingency of childhoods in history presents important sites to further theorize nationalism. And finally, I challenge the notion that nationalism, especially everyday nationalism, is a phenomenon that does not need to involve childhood and children. Childhood as a phenomenon is most often relegated to the periphery of analysis about nationalism in general. As a consequence, theories of nationalism remain biased against children. What would nationalism theory be like if it was also created with children in mind? From the small spaces of childhood, rather than exclusively adults in mind, where adults are seen as mature, independent, complete, finished beings, while children are left out because they are seen as non-political. Echoing Nick Lee, what would an immature social theory of nationalism look like that includes the small spaces of childhood and works against adult bias of sociological and political theorizing, including its anthropocentric underpinnings? This type of theorizing would see adults, as well as children, as becoming as incomplete, who are coming to the world with all their senses. Questions then could be asked: how are agencies around nationalism built, or in the process of being built? How do discourses, materialities, effects, sensations allow agencies to emerge? What relationalities emerge and could be nurtured to imagine new kinds of belonging to the nation? Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Millei, for this fascinating talk. A lot of interesting insights, and I'm sure a lot to discuss. So with that being said, I would like to open up the floor for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand or put your question in the chat. Okay, let's see. Marco, please go ahead.
Thank you, Shuja. Yeah, there's a lot here. So the presentation was very complex. I'm not sure that I really need to read maybe the paper, re-listen, because there is a lot here. I'm not sure whether I actually, in the question, in the comments now that I'm going to make, whether I do justice to what you said. So please let me know if I got it wrong. But I do appreciate particularly the fact that you engage with children as not as a homogeneous category. So you did go around and differentiate, particularly you mentioned children with migrant backgrounds, and that's particularly interesting for me that I engage in quite a lot with people with a migrant background, and obviously there will be a lot of other intersectionality that you can think about, plus different abilities, etc. So it's good that you unpack the category of children. This is something I really appreciate. But going back to the example that you made, I'm not sure whether I understood correctly when you say that the nature pedagogy actually allows to de-ethnicize and de-racialize the nation, because the example that you made actually it shows the opposite, if I understood correctly, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So you do see how the white Swedish is able to navigate the nature space in a comfortable way, whereas children with migrant backgrounds actually is the other way around. So actually you do see how practices of nature, in this case, they reaffirm the divide, the ethnic divide that actually you want to overcome. So this is one point, but again, correct me if I'm wrong. The other point is how to use you spend so much time looking at the nature and mention his earthly child, and I think there's it's quite productive as a conception. But at the same times, I wonder, why does he have to be confined to the child, that earthly dimension? Can it not be extended to the human beings as a whole? So, what is it specific that goes to the children when we imagine them in that way? And again, um, how does a nation that is reimagined through this conception, how does it look like? This is something that maybe if you can specify better, it would be particularly beneficial for me. But maybe the last point, when it goes to agency, I really think agency do we see really here the agency of the children, or is just what the adults project on the children? So at the end of the day, it's you that you project the children, you construct the children through this perspective of being earthly human beings. It's not the children themselves that they see in this way. I hope this is clear what I'm saying. I hope. Thank you very much.
Yes. So Marco, do you want me to respond now, or?
I leave it to you, Anna, to collect other questions.
I'm very happy to respond. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the first one was about reaffirming the differences. And I think maybe it wasn't clear how I said it, but it actually does reaffirm, of course, the differences. What it does also to decode, which means that we are not talking about racism anymore, but we are talking about being differently in nature. We are not talking about, migration background, but just not knowing, things about nature. So the point was really to give a different coding of to the difference, right? So it doesn't mean that it's overcome, but this is how everyday nationalism around nature creates these divides without being seen as racist or without being seen as ethnicizing children. So I think perhaps this clarifies, and I think that we are understanding it the same way. The second question was the earthling, what is it specific to children, and how does nation reimagine these conceptions? So of course it's earthling has been used in all this writing that I was referring to adults too. But I see that, and related to your next question, agency, is that when we come to the word, we have very different capacities to be in this world, but only those capacities are acknowledged and come into making sense that have already cultural references in how adults see the world. So the children, and that's what I've talked about, agencies, that the capacities that are being recognized become agency, if you want to say it that way, and how children act in the world, that those will be recognized by us researchers or others as agentic actions. However, there are other action or other capacities with which we explore or which we sense the biological world, the ecology that we are being located in, and those are not kind of identified and recognized early on in order to create a different, or to attach a different cultural understanding to it, right? So these modernist notions of how to be together, or what it means to be in a community, is sort of narrowed to this human community that the children are being socialized into. However, they would have capacities to relate differently and to gain cultural understandings of those different relations if education or parenting early on wouldn't close down these capacities and agencies. Yeah, so that's, I think, and that's where that's what when I was talking about the spaces of education, because it's always something that enables change, right? Education is always about making some form of change, either in children or in society through children. And this is where we could maybe engage with these different types of sense making in the world. And that's why I was spending so much time on.
Thank you, Zsuzsa.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Please raise your hand or put question into the chat. Yes, Michael, go ahead.
Do you hear Michael?
Michael, you're mute. Michael, you're mute. You're okay, Michael, now. Go.
Maybe it's the headphone.
I don't know. Should we go if there's another question while we're waiting for Michael, maybe? Let me unmute Michael maybe as well. Can you unmute Michael? Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, I apologize. I'll blame being ill. Thank you very much. Apologies, this comes from a media scholar, so I'm going to ask you a question about the media. So a lot of the research that I've come across about children focuses on the education system and the extent to which that kind of inculcates national forms of identification and belonging. To what extent do you think media has a role to play, either in also contributing to children's understanding of themselves as national, or alternatively offering them other ways of thinking about the world? So, you know, providing them with ways of kind of empathizing with others, or seeing themselves as something more than national. Have you done any research on that, or come across any research that looks at the media's role in kind of children's education in an informal sense?
I haven't done research, but there is research, and also there is research on technology and the use of technology and how that comes together with nationalism and childhood. In this way that I did research with, it's only about these imaginaries that children receive very early on from the different media, and they try to put together in their representations. As you saw on the pictures, you know, they were very much looking like what they see in the media. So they are very much reliant on that. So that's all I could say from my research. But there is other research too.
But in your arguing about the potential to try and get children to imagine themselves beyond the nation, do you think the media might have a role in
Absolutely,
that process?
yes, and absolutely, especially games and that sort of stuff, because they are already creating new forms of communities through these games and other forms of engagement in social media and so on, right? So I would see it that way, definitely.
Yeah.
And they are also engaged in speculative games, and there lots of potential, right?
And can I just ask one follow-up? With the children from kind of migrant backgrounds, diasporic backgrounds, second, third, fourth generation, do you find that they have, because they have kind of cross-cutting cultural affiliations, do you find that they have kind of more, I don't know what the word is, open attitudes? Do they tend to be a bit more cosmopolitan in the way that they define themselves as perhaps Swedish and, I don't know, Turkish or Iraqi or whatever it is? Do you notice any difference between the kind of the third, fourth generation?
I mean, you know, this is the question of universalism that we were talking about, right? So it's very important which childhood and where and which period and so on. And of course, if children are going around the world, they develop this very cosmopolitan point of view very early on. But sometimes they are not able to link it with the nation. They are just seeing different you know, colors of houses, or you know, they identify the difference in that way, or different you know, ways people speak, so by language and that sort of stuff. Okay. So it's depending on what early we are talking about. That's the other consideration, right? Because I'm working with very young children, 3 to 5. So for them, being in a different place is more important in that way, right? The how the place looks and how they relate to it and so on.
Okay. Thank you.
I think there's one extra question in the chat. What would you say happens or has to happen to the methodologies of studying nation when it happens with or through children and childhood?
It's a very big question, right? And I think, you know, we know that nationalism can be studied through children, because also migrant children, because they come to a new national culture, right? And they have to learn this. So it's very easy this way. But the other way around, I don't want to repeat all of the different methodologies that childhood studies actually offer, because it's a whole huge field which were thinking around different methodologies for 30 years or even further, you know, to engage with children ideas, children becoming, children phenomenologically, and all these different questions. So I would say that there is a whole host of possibilities to study the nation through children's to engaging with children's words. And that's what I try to argue in these small spaces, you know, how to go from these small spaces and connect to the national, which is, I think, the most difficult task to do.
Thank you. Just checking if there's another question in the chat.
Yes, that's Louise. I think she's there. Maybe she could ask the question.
Yeah, yes. Sorry. My futures just came in as well and made a great deal of noise. Yeah, so I mean, it was really, really interesting. So thank you so much, and makes me think about loads of different things, and it's great to see you.
Yes.
But I just thought it's really interesting because you seem to focus on quite a soft kind of banal nationalism, and then this idea of children as the future, and actually sometimes that makes children very vulnerable to really quite aggressive acts of nationalism. And I put one example in the chat, such as the kind of deliberate abduction of children from Ukraine by Russia in order to re-educate them as Russian nationals rather than Ukrainian nationals, I presume. Similar examples are in the Trump era, when there was a deliberate tactic to separate children from their families at the US border in an attempt to disincentivize families from trying to get into the US. And there were no records. It was published in Children's Geographies. There was no records kept of who those children had travelled with, so there's no way, even when they realised that policy was barbaric. It was really difficult to reunite those families. So I just wanted to kind of just flag that as a possible kind of way of a possible other way that nationalism is deployed around children's bodies. And I also had an answer. I don't know if you said this, but Marco mentioned about this kind of idea of kind of actually reaffirming the national divides through nature. But actually, your example that you gave, I thought about indigenous ideas about nature were very interesting and really tied to things like ideas around the Anthropocene and a different relation that we need to have with nature, which I just thought was an answer. But you maybe said it because my whole family decided to descend just as you were answering that question. So more a point, more a series of points really, and things and provocations than anything I should imagine you can address today. Although you can surprise us all with a massive knowledge of all of this.
Yes, thanks, Louise. And as I said, I was really highlighting one connection because my task here was the task I gave myself, let's say it that way, is to think around what the study of childhood and nation could give to nationalism, theorizing methodology, and so on. So I highlighted only one intersection of childhood and nation, and of course. I also looked at in our 2015 book, we have even chapters around how children's bodies are engaged in this sort of politics, politics of the nation. And we can start from abortion, we can start on removing the uterus of women, of particular minorities, and so on. So I think that sort of biopolitics is very much targeted to children before birth even and during birth to make the nation. So there is this very strong, because nation and childhood is very much interconnected from the beginning of nation building. So because of this futurity and because of the real children's bodies who are becoming the future nation. So yes, there is lots of research actually around that intersection of children bodies as political objects to manipulate for nation building and national purposes.
Thank you very much. I think there's another hand from Katarina. Please go ahead.
Hi, Suza, and thank you so much for your presentation. I'm really sorry I missed the beginning of it. I had problems with Teams and I couldn't manage to connect. But as from what I understand, you talked a bit about banal nationalism, and as you know, that's a big part of my own research into nationalism and children. And perhaps we can talk about that another time because obviously you've already presented that. My question is more about the link with humanity and nature and the idea of the earth. And from the presentation of Latour and Beck, I sort of had the impression that you're suggesting that this is an alternative framework to nationalism, that somehow we can move away from the nation and its role in socializing children to nationalism. Which I think is really interesting. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more perhaps about what might be the interactions between the national framework and the post-national or sort of more earthly framework. Is there still a role for the national or the nation state framework in that vision? Or does it completely replace the nation in terms of that socialization? What might be some of the implications of that in ethical terms, perhaps, or in terms of rights, perhaps, children as subjects, as citizens, as political actors? I don't know, just some ideas.
Yes, thanks, Catherine. And you missed the part when I actually showed your book and referenced your work, and also cited how, you know, how studies of children can contribute to nations. So you were duly acknowledged here, I think.
Oh, no. Sorry, I missed it.
Yes, and I just want to go to your question. So I think maybe there is a couple of things here. One, I always imagine, I was very much inspired by, you know, this Canadian nation building when you could have a multicultural nation. And I don't see how we cannot expand that notion to other beings or things, you know, like rivers and so on. So how could we create a different type of nation, not community, like a common, rather, you know, a commoning? And I think that there is in the literature some thoughts around these different kinds of commoning for nation. And that's also in the Canadian context when they are using environmental philosophy in very much deeply in this indigenous worldviews. So in that way, I think maybe there is a double project to remake the nation as more inclusive to other things, not just humans. And then that's why I was quoting everybody that I did who actually had something to say about that. And then the other thing is, of course, the socialization effect, that what happens when we do that, but not just, you know, as an imaginary, as a different sort of common in symbolic term, but what happens when we do that as a biological way, that, you know, we also acknowledge our belongingness to this ecological world, not just the symbolic world of human community. Does that answer somehow?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And that comes with a different ethics, right?
Yeah.
Because it's, and I don't want to just talk about children's rights. Of course, that comes into play too, but I think it's all sorts of other rights then that needs to be rethought, and that people already start, I think, for a long time now, rethinking.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, since we're running out of time a little bit, I will give the opportunity to ask one more question. So if anyone still has a question, this is the time to ask. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, then I think it's a good time to close the session. I would like to, sorry, is there one more question in the chat? Right, is there something specific from a Finnish perspective which can teach us all? There's a lot we can learn in education.
It's one to take away. I realise we haven't got time to talk about that now.
Yes. I think that this study that I cited first was this nature idea, right? That Nordic space. Are we still online? Yes. It's just everything frozen.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, maybe I take away and think about it, and we get back to you in an email. I see that there is something wrong with the internet.
Right, that sounds good. All right, again, many thanks to Professor Millei for this fascinating, super interesting talk. Many thanks to you all for participating and asking really good questions. As I said before, this talk is recorded and can be found on the website of the Loughborough University Nationalism Network. So if you'd like to review this, then that is possible. And last, we would hope to see you in the next session, and have a nice day. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.